Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. So, we in the last week we had concluded with the idea of the spike triggered average, and we showed that the spike triggered average is uh, proportional to the estimate of the cross correlation between the output spike train produced by the stimulus xt, where xt is Gaussian white noise stimulus, let us say, and our PT is the observed spike train. So, just a recap of our model again, which is our xt. We have our ht that we want to find of this LTI system, and then we are getting yt, a proxy sort of to the membrane potential, and then we have a static nonlinearity which can be arbitrary, that produces the driving function lambda t for the point process generator, which is producing the PT, which is summation our delta t minus ti, and these ti's are our observations over the period capital T. That is, over that period we are observing nt spikes, and the spikes are occurring at time points ti. So, the few results that we have so far is that our ryx tau is proportional to h tau, or the impulse response itself, that is this LTI system's definition. And that is true in the case of xt is a white Gaussian noise process, and it has a variance sigma square. Then we know what the constant of this proportionality is. We also showed that our R, if we cross correlate or estimate a cross correlation of Rpx, which is Rpx hat, then that is proportional to what we call the spike triggered average, which is nothing but x ti minus tau, and this is summing over all the spikes onto capital NT, and this is nothing but the STA, or spike triggered average. So, now we are left with the task of connecting from P to x, then lambda to x, then y to x. So, we will go over these steps sequentially, but to make the first step, we had introduced the idea that we can convert the PT from the spike train observed at the spikes observed at time points ti, and we have another process q which is binned in small enough bin size delta. Then we said that if we cross correlate Rpx, that is, if we cross correlate p and x and get the cross correlation function Rpx tau, this is approximately R qx tau. So, the q is a variable, or the process actually, which takes on values 0 or 1, and our delta is small enough such that probability of the ith bin qi equal to 1 is nothing but delta times lambda at I delta position. That is almost the instantaneous firing rate there. multiplied by that tiny window. Now we know this RPX tau's estimate to be the spike triggered average, that is, it's proportional to the spike triggered average, which means that our RQX is also proportional to the spike triggered average. So now can we compute RQX tau? Let us say we now need to compute RQX tau. So that means it is simply the, so again since Q is observations and not, we do not have infinite observations, we will only have an estimate of RQX, and RQX tau is ideally the expectation of Q at I delta and X at I delta minus tau. This expectation is what we need to compute. So if we start with the expectation of Qi delta, we have, so that can be written as, if now we have essentially capital M bins, and there are this is going to be this needs to be summed over all the bins, that is I equals 1 to capital M, where if this is the total time t, our t is nothing but M delta, and so the average, it is replaced by the average for all the bins, this expectation for each of the bins. So now if we compute this expectation, we can do it in this particular way, where we introduce a dummy variable. If we consider, let us say, only the inside of the summation, we introduce a dummy variable a, and let us compute the expectation under a of this expectation E Q I delta into X I delta minus tau, given X I delta minus tau equal to A. So this expectation can simply be written as this from basic probability. And so our Xi delta minus tau can be replaced by A. So what we have here is EA, and we have expectation of Qi delta times A. So that is, we have A outside and expectation of Qi delta, given that Xi delta minus tau equal to A. So essentially we are introducing this A and then integrating it out by getting this expectation. So now what is the expectation of Qi delta? Qi delta, that is independent of A now, that is Q, we know that the probability of Qi delta equals 1 is delta lambda I delta, and so we can say that otherwise it is 0. So we can simply say that it is EA and A times, if we now have this compute this expectation, it turns out to be 1 times delta lambda I delta. So 1 times delta lambda I delta given X I delta minus tau equal to A. So I hope you appreciate why we introduced this A. that is to be able to separate out this x and compute this expectation. And now we go back the same step by removing the a, and that turns out to be simply our expectation of and the delta can come out, delta times lambda I delta times x I delta minus tau. So the forward step that we did here, we are simply doing the reverse of that step here, and now what we are left with is delta and expectation of lambda I delta times x I delta minus tau. Now this is a familiar expression for us. This is simply our r lambda x. So if we now write this is simply delta times r lambda x hat tau. So we have now an additional result from here, rpx, r lambda x, and that rpx is approximately equal to rqx tau hat. And now we are saying that this cross correlation between q and x, that is the input and q, is proportional to the cross correlation between lambda and x. That is essentially what we show here. So you can see that we are gradually coming towards our yx. So what we have so far is that our spike triggered average is proportional to our the spike triggered average is rpx, which is proportional to rqx, which is proportional to r lambda x. And we know that our ryx is proportional to our h tau. That is what we are after. So now we are separated by this nonlinearity, this static nonlinearity, which can be arbitrary. And so if somehow we can show that this r lambda x is proportional to this ryx, let us say, if we could somehow show this. We haven't done it yet. If we somehow show this, then we can now say, we would be able to say that our impulse response of the LTI that we are trying to obtain is simply a scaled version of the spike triggered average of the stimulus. So this is the remaining disconnect in concluding that, and so for that we need a special kind of theorem, which is called Price's theorem. So that we will just assume this and show that if we have partial derivative of the expectation of g x y del rho n, will tell all the terms soon, that is the same as expectation of del 2n del xn del yn of g x y. So here x and y are jointly Gaussian, zero mean. gxy is any function that is differentiable and well behaved. And rho is the covariance of x and y, which is nothing but ryx minus mu x times mu y. So, in our case, where we have this x, our ht and y, and then we have our static nonlinearity, and then lambda t, our lambda, let us say xt, yt, lambda t. Then we are saying that our stimulus, by stimulus design, we can take xt to be white Gaussian noise, that we can play such a stimulus to the neuron. Depending on the system, it will be a visual white noise or auditory white noise, and so on. So, if this is the case, then x and y, because this is an LTI, x and y turn out to be jointly Gaussian, and our mu x is 0. This is, we have 0 mean white Gaussian noise. So, this rxy, ryx and minus mu xy, simply the rho becomes ryx. So, our rho, the covariance, is nothing but ryx. So, I am dropping the tau here to for simplicity of expressing the terms here. And as we have said, the nonlinearity, let us say this yt is going into the input with this nonlinearity producing this lambda t, which can be represented simply like this, that lambda as a function of y, that is lambda as a function of yt. Because it is a static nonlinearity, this lambda is simply the output lambda t is simply lambda of yt. And since we said that this nonlinearity can be arbitrary, then we can of course write out this nonlinearity as a polynomial, which is as an infinite order polynomial, that is coefficient ak y to the power k, where k goes from 0 to infinity. So, we have our lambda y given. So, these are all the terms that are given so far, and we are assuming the nonlinearity to be an arbitrary nonlinearity here. We know now that rho is simply ryx, and so now what we need is to choose gxy that will allow us to show the connection between lambda x and yx, r lambda x and ryx. So, if we take this gxy to be simply x times lambda y or x lambda, then and n equals 1, then the left hand side of this equation here of the Price's theorem, this is, let us say, equation A, that turns out to be delta del rho of the expectation of x lambda. So, and that is simply delta r lambda x del rho, del r lambda x del rho. So, that means it is and that is the same as del r lambda x del r yx. So, if del r lambda x and del r yx, del r lambda x del r yx is a constant, that is the r lambda x as a derivative of r lambda x with respect to ryx, if that is a constant, that would mean that ryx is proportional to r lambda x, which is exactly what we intended to go after in order to complete this chain. That is, if we, that is derivative of r lambda x with respect to ryx is constant, that means they have a linear relationship, that is they are proportional. So here if we now go forward with this assumption of gxy to be x lambda y and look at the right hand side. So the right hand side is expectation of, we said that del 2n g xy del xn del yn, and our gxy is lambda x, and our lambda is nothing but summation ak y to the power k, that is we have equal to expectation of, now n is 1, so del 2, and we have here essentially x times summation k equals 1 to infinity ak y to the power k del x del y. N is 1 as we had done in the previous, on the left hand side. So now if we do this partial derivatives, so what we will be left with is simply expectation of ak, expectation of with the derivative with respect to x, this is gone, and now with the derivative with respect to y, we will be left with summation k equals 1, here it is k equals 0 to infinity, because that is what that is what it should be. Next, so with the derivative, the k equals 0 case goes to 0 when we take the derivative with y. So now we are summing from k equals 1 to infinity, and we will have ak y to the power k minus 1, and we can take the summation out, that is summation k equals 1 to infinity expectation at ak times expectation of y to the power k minus 1. And we know that our xy is jointly Gaussian, and x is Gaussian, so y is also Gaussian, and so this is simply the k minus 1th central moment of a Gaussian, and so it is a constant. So the sum of ak times a constant can be shown, it converges, and so this turns out to be a constant, which is what we intended or we required to have to complete the chain. So what finally we have is r lambda x del r y x is a constant, which means that r lambda x is proportional to ryx. And so we are done in the sense that if we get the spike triggered average, then that spike triggered average is simply proportional to simply proportional to the h tau that we are after. So this connection is made, and so we are done showing that indeed the spike triggered average can be used to estimate what our ht should be. Now that we have something proportional to the impulse response, using that we can find out empirically what this nonlinearity would be. That is, given the set of data of xt and ht with the convolution with the estimated ht, will get a number of yt's, and we will get samples of yt's, and using the connection between yt and lambda t estimated from our pt, we can, with repetitions of the stimulus, we can find an empirical sort of function that transforms y into lambda. So this whole idea can now be extended to different kind of forms where the stimulus x t is multidimensional, that this is a vector, or the stimulus, or many dimensions. In the case of the auditory system, let us say, we can have this xt to be simply the spectrogram, or how the energy at different frequencies is changing over time. So in that case, this becomes x simply becomes a vector of elements for different frequencies and goes over time. So that is, if this axis is frequency and this is time, we have at each time point we have different frequencies, and they have certain values, that intensities for each of these frequencies, and that is varying over time, and we can design that to be Gaussian white noise, making them independent of frequency bins and time. We can then do the spike triggered averaging on the spectrogram itself, that is a vector random process here. Similarly, when we talk of the visual system, our x will be a two-dimensional matrix, or rather the pixel values in my entire field of view. So it is, instead of one vector like this, it is going to be simply a matrix of white noise image for all the pixels. That is our xt, and this is changing with time. So I'm basically, each frame of image is coming successively, and that is our xt in each time instant. And so we can similarly do the spike triggered average for the visual system and get estimates of the impulse response. In this case, the impulse response is going to be, as you can imagine, a video, that is a set of frames of images over tau. So that means it is a video. The receptive field itself is a video. And in the spectrogram case, the receptive field would be a two-dimensional matrix where we have frequency on one axis and tau on the other axis, just like the spectrogram itself. And so in the somatosensory system also, you can extend this similarly, just like visual stimulus over a certain patch of skin. Let's say we can have pixelated values of pressure or whatever the mode of the stimulation is, and we, with the Gaussian white noise assumption and the design of the stimulus accordingly, we can use spike triggered average for the somatosensory system as well. So with the spike triggered average, as we had earlier said, they are good. Spike triggered average turns out to be good in the periphery, like in the auditory nerve, in the retinal ganglion neurons, RGN, even in the LGN. Some neurons in V1, like the simple cells, it can be modeled well. Similarly, from the auditory nerve in the auditory system, they are well modeled, well predict the behavior of different types of neurons in the cochlear nucleus. That is the next stage. In the cochlear nucleus, some neurons even in the inferior colliculus, and so on. However, as we go into the primary auditory cortex and beyond, and here also as we go beyond V1 or even the complex cells of V1, we cannot use the spike triggered average to model their behavior very accurately. However, as we had mentioned, we can still linearize those systems over a small parameter space and predict the behavior within there, and maybe combine it across different points in the parameter space to get a larger model. And finally, as we will later on see, like in the auditory cortex and even in the higher order visual cortices, even though the spike triggered average is not a very good model to predict responses of the neurons to new stimuli, we will see that with behavior, certain learning, the spike triggered average can change. That is, the receptive field itself is changing due to some phenomena of learning or some perturbation to the system. And we will see that those, although they are not good models, they are instructive in the sense of understanding and going after what mechanisms are there behind those kind of plastic changes. So even in the higher stages, the spike triggered average is useful, even though not as models but as other descriptions of mechanisms that may be underlying. So that we have now gone across the forward problem, one aspect of the forward problem, that is going from the stimulus to the response. We will now in the next lecture try to understand the backward process, that is from the response to the stimulus. One particular aspect of it is reconstructing the stimulus, and basically try to see what is going on in the sense of that what is producing these spikes. So these are useful in brain computer interfaces and so on, this kind of decoding methodologies, that is going backward from the spike train to the phenomena that is causing the spike train. Thank you.